Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Stephen Lights with Workforce 2080. Grateful to be here with you. Thank you for taking some time to watch this video. Um, I'm really excited to present this to you today as I've been working on it for a couple of weeks now, just to kind of compile some data for you to help you understand some things that I've been working on. And I think this is pretty special, especially for anybody who's interested in understanding what some of the issues in employment happen to be these days. I'm a big advocate of finding out where issues are, becoming, more of something that's repetitive, and especially, trying to find a way to decrease those issues, or trying to find a way to make them better. So what I did is I went on a website, and basically it's the news releases section of the Department of Labor, and the Wage and Hour Division actually publishes articles about any sort of wage and hour violations that they have successfully won and closed. And believe it or not, I've done a full year look back up to 1/1 of 2021 up to current. And what I've come across is some pretty amazing data. What it's proved is that employers this year have actually had to pay back wages to a bunch of employees. Basically, there's a 2-year look back period when the Department of Labor shows up at your door. They're going to look at your books and your timesheets and your employee records for up to 2 years. And if they find any type of violations, you could be charged a civil money penalty. But more importantly, if they found any sort of violations with the way that you pay your wages, they are going to basically hold you accountable to that and make you pay back wages. Plus, they're actually going to make you pay double, because that's known to them as you know, it's kind of a penalty for not paying it on time and not paying it appropriately. And also because you made the employee wait, almost 2 years for their wages, if not even longer. So what I came across was some pretty amazing data. What you're seeing here is that out of the 176 incidences that I've come across this year on these articles, um, out of those, over $3.7 million of total civil money penalties. Now, most of these are surrounding, willful violation. Willful violation is basically stating willful or repeated violation. So let's just give you an example. An employer had violated this rule before, and they kind of got a slap on the hand. They didn't get charged any money, but then they did it again. It's kind of like you got a warning when speeding in a speed zone, but then all of a sudden the same cop pulled you over the next day for doing it again. Well, that time they gave you a ticket. So that's basically the equivalent of a civil money penalty. When it comes to repeat violation. Willful violation is basically knowing that you're doing wrong, but still doing it even though you knew it was wrong. And even trying to hide it. I mean, there were some instances where some of these employers would fudge the numbers on the employee's timesheet, or they would eliminate records, or destroy items that shouldn't have been destroyed, telling people to lie during the interview process. I mean, it's absolutely crazy what some of these employers did. But over $3.7 million paid in total civil money penalties this year. But where the number actually gets kind of scary is the total back wages that have been paid back. So what this means is that there's a systemic issue of employers paying people improperly, or misclassifying them, or deducting items out of their pay that shouldn't have been deducted. Taking paid breaks out, but or missing payrolls. Whatever type of situation. We'll go into that in a minute. But basically, these employers, out of 176 of them, collectively, they have paid $86.9 million in back wages back to their employees. So you start asking yourself, you're like, my goodness, that's a massive number. That's not just some small, minute number. It really isn't. But the truth is employers over the past couple of years, before any of these came to light, had not paid people up to $43.5 million of wages. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of people who are affected by this, and people who are not paid properly, people whose tips were withheld, people who are misclassified, people who missed payrolls or weren't paid for all the hours they worked. I mean, talk about a scary situation where your employer has that much power where they can withhold that much money from you. And, And of course, the good news is the government agency came in and, of course, found the issues and is making it right by making the employer make the employee whole. But you might be asking yourself, is the government doing this for any specific reason? It's interesting because if you read these articles, they say, if an employer doesn't pay their employees a fair wage, then they are basically, almost monopolizing their industry because they have an unfair advantage across, or should we say, um, they're making other employers suffer. In other words, so it's kind of like these employers are kind of getting off by not paying as much wage to their employees. And on top of that, it's just an unfair advantage. So it's an interesting concept, but I know that's not the real reason behind it. Because the truth is when you pay wages to an employee, those wages have to be taxed by federal taxes. So that's like your W-4 state taxes, but then you're also talking about Social Security and Medicare taxes. So believe it or not, there's a lot of money that's actually collected as a result of just those few things. So just this year, when those wages are paid back to employees, the government or Social Security Administration for the employee and the employer is actually going to collect $10.7 million off of those payments because the employer and the employee pay 6.2% each to the Social Security Administration for wages that are paid. So if you take that 86 or $86.9 million and multiply that by 12.4%, that's the employee and the employer portion together. The government actually just got an additional $10.7 million. So the Social Security Administration actually just got a pretty big influx of wages. So the government has an incentive to go after these folks. It's not just for the goodness of their heart, but it's also, like they said, to prevent unfair advantages amongst other employers, and also to pay employees for the wages that they're due. But we know it's not always meant for the government. But then you also have to look at it from a Medicare standpoint. There's Medicare taxes that have to be collected. So the employer and the employee contribute 1.45%. Of course, if the person's highly comp, different story. But, one of the things I didn't put in this calculation are, state taxes or federal taxes. If we threw federal taxes in the mix here, it's probably going to be a much larger number. And the federal taxes actually go to the federal government. The Social Security taxes go into the Social Security Administration. Medicare goes into Medicare taxes, and the state goes to the state tax fund. So if you look at it from that perspective, the government could potentially collect. I mean, even if we just took, a measly 5% of this, that's still, that's $8.6 million. That's so 10% of that's 8 million. So half of that would be 4 million. So imagine that much money going to the federal government that's been missed out. So they're definitely looking for a reason to go after people. But what I thought was interesting is the statistical breakdown of what these cases involved. Now, I didn't granularize it too much, but I did it just enough to prove what was going on. So out of the number of incidents that occurred, there was 318 separate instances of issues out of these 176 cases. Some of them had multiple items involved, like misclassifications, paid improperly, failure to keep accurate records, so on and so forth. Well, out of those 318 incidents, or should we say, items of issue, the biggest and the most, crucial item that's happened here is employers are paying their employees improperly. That can be, not paying a tipped person their full, their full minimum wage for all the hours they work plus overtime. It could be withholding tips from employees. It could be, it could be where they didn't pay somebody a commission and didn't include it in overtime, like a non-discretionary bonus. Somebody not paid minimum wage, somebody not paid the appropriate salary if they were claimed exempt. So over half of these cases, people were paid improperly. Hence why we're at this particular, pivotal moment in time where that much is actually going to be collected in back wages. But then you look at, what's the second largest item? Well, failure to keep accurate records. The government has a requirement for employers to actually keep accurate records on their employees for a certain period of time. Now, because it's the FLSA, that would be up to 3 years in most instances. I believe it's 3. So with them, you have to hold things like the employee's timesheets. You have to hold paycheck stubs. You have to hold any sort of records of payments made to them, bonuses, commissions, anything, calculations of pay, their name, their social security number. I mean, it's a variety of different things that have to be held. But as you can see, 24% of these cases, had this type of issue. And the third largest was misclassifications. So this is where employers actually misclassified employees as either independent contractor, made them exempt, or didn't pay them appropriately. And most of the time, it wasn't that they didn't make them non-exempt. It was just they made them exempt and they didn't pay them overtime, where they misclassified them and therefore they stated, you're an executive exemption, so I don't have to pay you overtime. I just have to pay you a salary. But the truth is they still violate it because the person's duties or salary test didn't meet the actual duties or salary test in order to claim the exemption. But then also contractor, if a person's truly not a contractor, if they're a W-2 employee and then an employer makes them 1099 contractor, that's not appropriate in most instances. So, clearly we could see that most of these issues surround, more than 80% of these fall in line with these three items right here. So out of all those types of issues, you're probably asking a couple of questions, and I'm glad you do, but I actually have a way, and I've broken down these cases to kind of see what's going on. So one of the things I wanted to show you is which state had the highest number of penalties. So clearly, the state with the largest number of penalties was Pennsylvania. There was actually a pretty big settlement amongst one of these companies where they paid a pretty significant amount of money back to their employees and back wages. So if I come over here and if I sort it by Z to A, so if I pull the largest, there was a company in Pennsylvania, Holland Services, that actually paid their employees $43 million in its oil and gas because they improperly classified workers as independent contractors. They also failed to pay overtime. They did not keep accurate records of all daily hours, instead recorded the number of days worked per week. So they paid them like a flat rate. So $43 million in back wages were paid back. So clearly Pennsylvania is the winner with the most amount of penalties up to this point. And if they wouldn't have had that, technically California and them would be nose to nose, because California was up to $8.6 million in settlements or back wages that were paid. And then of course you have a couple of others. You have, Florida, 2.9 million. And then you have Nevada, which is 2.08, which is crazy because that's out in the middle of nowhere. So it's not like it's, in this really apparent place that's, close by. It's out in the middle of nowhere. But, things, violations are violations. They happen no matter what. And, trailing right behind it, you've got Michigan. So, and Oklahoma. So sorry, I'm missing out on a couple of numbers here. So you can kind of tell that, most of these issues are stemming around, employer friendly states like California. That's quite significant. And if that $43 million penalty wouldn't have happened, California and Pennsylvania would have been, neck and neck. So, this is just to prove that there is, this is the states where the most amount of compliance issues are occurring when it comes to paying wages. And from there, we go even deeper. We can say, well, okay, well, what about industry? What if we were to take these out and we would say, hey, why don't you tell us the industry? So if I pull this over and said, well, why don't we find out about, industry? So I'm going to grab, I think it's this column right here. We're going to grab this over. Actually, that's the name of the company. So we need to pull column D over. So this is going to give us the total, or should we say, this is going to give us the total amount of penalties that are paid across these particular groups. So let's go up here. Let's pull this as values. Let's do sum. So as you can see here, these are all the different industries that are pulled across, and I just had to come up with blanket industries. I'm sorry, I don't really have a good classification method, but I tried to keep it as close as possible. But clearly you can see construction had a pretty significant amount of, FLSA violations across this year so far. Healthcare was right behind it, as you can see, but I have a feeling these are just one of the top three. But if we scroll down even further, if we look at oil and gas and restaurants, I bet you those are going to be pretty tough. So oil and gas for sure, number one on the list, $48 million worth of back wages paid to employees. And if we go pull up restaurants, you've got, close, third place or fourth place, $7.3 million worth of wages that were not paid. So clearly, number one is oil and gas. Number two is going to be construction. Number three is healthcare. Number four is restaurants. So clearly, these industries have a lot of employees, and they typically pay a little bit different than some, especially in healthcare. There's a lot of shift differentials, sign-on bonuses. In restaurants, it's more like, okay, I just need a tipped employee, but you can obviously tell if that $48 million settlement wouldn't have occurred, or that $43 million settlement wouldn't have occurred, this obviously wouldn't have been as high of an inflated number. It would have been, it would have been, 5 million, which would have been, in this case, less than restaurants. But clearly that $43 million settlement, inflated this number quite high. So the top three without that number would have been, first place construction, second place healthcare, and third place would have been restaurant, and fourth place would have been oil and gas. But clearly there's a systemic issue with these employers not paying properly. And, you can clearly tell just by looking at this, where these violations are occurring. So I wanted to kind of, give y'all an idea of what I've been working on to give you a little bit of insight. Eventually I want to publish a blog article kind of going over this and just kind of breaking down the information even more granular than this video. But I figured this would be an easy way to just, hear me talk about it, hear me represent the data. And, all of this is represented by, links to these articles. So the intention or the intent here is to, post this to where if you want to go find the article for, something that happened to your state, you can easily get in here and do that. And this really hit home for me when, I actually found out an employer that is right down the street from me actually violated this law. So it's actually interparish security. I live in a town called Hammond, Louisiana, which is, not that far away from Baton Rouge. It's just north of New Orleans and just east of Baton Rouge. There was a security services company that actually misclassified some of their workers and labeled them as executives. And they basically paid them on a salary basis, and they did not pay them at least $684 a week like they were supposed to. And believe it or not, over the 2-year look back period, that employer ended up having to pay $31,000 of back wages. And that's 15,000 times two, because again, the government actually multiplies it by two, just to, I guess, it's kind of a penalty to say, well, you messed up here, you made the employee wait, and you were in the wrong, so you need to pay double. So that's something the government does do. So clearly, if these employers knew what they were doing and took a little bit more time to understand the FLSA, they wouldn't be making as many violations, or having as many violations, should we say. So, I would like to classify myself as an independent contractor. So if your business needs help with this and it's something you're interested in, and you need some help with looking at these things, I'm happy to take a look at it. Because again, it's one of those things that intrigue me. But this information was really powerful to me because I had always thought that there were a lot of issues, but I never quite knew how much money was involved in it. So yeah, appreciate you guys for watching. Hope you like this video. And again, if you do like it, give it a thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe to my channel for more videos. And until then, y'all take care.